As has become our custom at the Wichita Pachyderm Club, when our favorite Congressman, Mike Pompeo, has visited us, we like to introduce him by showing a video of him in action on our behalf in Washington, D.C.
Very simple. H.R. 59 has two very simple goals. First, to ensure that families in Kansas and across the country have access to nutritious and affordable food. And second, to make sure that those who wish to avoid food products that contain GMOs will be able to do so, that they will not be denied the right to know. Mr. Chairman, this is a common sense, pro-consumer, pro-farmer bill that brings clarity to food labeling and keeps affordable food for our constituents. So Senator Cotton and I had traveled to Vienna last week, and we learned of these secret side deals. And we had a chance yesterday. I personally asked Secretary Kerry if he had read what was in those two side deals, and he confirmed that he had not read what was in the deal. So now we can say with absolute certainty that there's no American official that has actually seen the full terms of the agreement that this president has signed off on. They're asking Congress to vote for a deal that we can't even see, and the American people will not have a chance to see either.
And when you hear members of Congress talk about the EPA being out of control, can you understand when you won't answer simple questions why someone might conclude that you don't give a darn what Congress thinks?
Well, it's unfortunate if that's your view, because I think that we're all here to serve the public.
Not just my view, Ms. McCabe. It's the view that you expressed when you said, we're not going to give you an answer, Mr. Pompeo. We're going to blow you off. It's unacceptable.
There were 5 security agents on the ground in this very dangerous facility. It was a villa. It wasn't an embassy or consulate. There was no structure. There was no external physical security that rose to the level that the State Department normally requires. That created this odd little exception for her friend, Ambassador Stevens. And the darndest thing is, Kimberly, I've gotten a lot of emails overnight and texts from folks I know. They still can't figure out why no one was fired. Not a single reprimand for anyone when we had 4 Americans killed and the first ambassador murdered in over 3 decades.
And her answer was?
Her answer was, I was prohibited by law from firing anyone. I assure you, had I been there, or has the leader been there, we would have figured out a way to make sure that someone inside the State Department was held accountable. That just didn't happen.
Congressman Mike Pompeo.
Thank you. I'm in better spirits today than I was at any of those moments. So first of all, thanks for having me back. I was here almost exactly a year ago. I was here at the end of October of last year, and I spoke about a handful of things. I want to sort of update those and talk about, in the same way this video did, sort of my year, the things I was working on, but all aimed at the next 354 days. It's how many times you will get out of bed between now and the time that we will all go elect our next commander-in-chief, the next president of the United States, the man who will be tasked with taking our country from the place it finds itself today to a place where America is proud to win again and is prepared to talk about how America's values will prevail across the world. We have done that. Frankly, we've done that under Republican and Democrat presidents alike. But today, alas, we have a leader who is unprepared to talk about those things. I was very pleased to see Sheriff Easter in the back corner and Sheriff Steed in that corner. I feel good, I feel secure. And I'll talk about our security a lot today. It has risen. When I looked at the remarks I made a year ago, it was near the top of the list, but nowhere near the top of the list in the same way that it is today. The threats around the world were bad then. If you go back and read the papers from those days, ISIS was the JV, Al-Qaeda was on the run, and a lot of people believed it. I would question whether you could find too many folks in very many places around the world who would believe that today. So you saw 4 different facets of my work in Washington. The first is the one that we still have an economy that's growing at an anemic rate. Now 7 years on, the administration continues to blame the Bush Depression. 7 years, Mr. President. At some point, you got to own it. And you see it. You see it in the salaries of ordinary working Kansans all across the state, folks who are struggling to find that first job or that next rung up on the ladder. We're going to be saddled with the sets of regulations this president's put in place for an awfully long time. It will take a bit, no matter who is elected president, to unwind them. But know this, if you go look at the 9 major regulations that this president has put in place, starting with those regulations under the Affordable Care Act, and now come full circle with what's called the Clean Power Plan, will be devastating for a place like Kansas where we make stuff. The House of Representatives has voted lock, stock, and barrel to undo each and every one of them. The Senate has voted to undo a couple. They have a procedural challenge over there that I hope Majority Leader McConnell or whoever replaces him will fix, and that we'll have someone in the White House who will actually sign that legislation come January of 2017. It matters a lot. It matters to every one of you in this room that those opportunities are available. I've spent a lot of time the last year and a half working to unpack the riddle that is how our government responded to the fact that 4 Americans came under attack on September 11th, 2012 in a faraway, distant place that we had sent them to keep us all safe. I've never been part of anything like the day that Secretary Clinton came to Washington, D.C. to testify. Susan was there. It was a zoo. And if you watch the Democrats on the panel, I have to tell you, I have not been that disgusted at any time in my time in Washington, D.C. It was the clearest demonstration yet that these people are not serious, that they don't care about America in the same way that so many others do. I remember in the opening minutes, it was otherworldly. When they had their time to speak, they took the time to show a video clip of me on Meet the Press. We had the former Secretary of State who had taken of her time to come before this committee to answer questions about the things she did and the things she led and what happened and what did not. We gave her every opportunity to speak, and they chose to show a video clip of a member of the committee. That's not serious, and we need to call them to account for that lack of seriousness. They may well have a different view. They may well have different conclusions about the actions that were taken in Benghazi, Libya, but it is simply not acceptable to obstruct and delay and to oppose an effort to get answers to important questions for you all about how 4 Americans, it could have been one of your family members, killed that night. I've met lots of Kansans in my travels who are in places very, very much like that. Last week, Susan and I traveled to Beirut, Lebanon. I was there with the House Intelligence Committee, and I'll talk about some of the visits that I had with Christian leaders. But we saw Kansans in those same risky places who were trying to help us get to places that were a little adventuresome. It could be them next. And we were trying to account for how our government does its work to keep these people at the point of the spear safe, and the Democrats chose to behave in ways that were deeply discordant with the U.S. Constitution. You know, it was also disappointing to watch the media respond that night, to listen to it, and I stopped listening at about 11 o'clock that night. Hillary was spectacular. She was great. She answered all the questions. She won. It was the best day of her campaign. No mention of the fact that for the first time America had access to information which showed clearly that she lied to the American people about the cause of the attacks that night, and that she knew it immediately. And that in fact she not only knew it, but she was telling the Egyptians, the Libyans, and her daughter that this was an attack conducted by terrorists, and then went to the family members, one of whom Susan sat with that day. Susan sat next to the father of Tyrone Woods for some 11 hours. And Mr. Woods relayed again to Susan in a private conversation that he allows me to speak about, saying that what Secretary Clinton told him when his son's body had been returned to Dover, Delaware, that this was about a video and that damn it, they were going to catch that guy. This is unconscionable. This isn't about whether there was enough military force supplied. This isn't about whether the security was adequate. This is about a foundational issue about government accountability. And in this respect, this administration failed those 4 Americans that night, and in turn failed each of us. I spent a good deal of my summer, July and August. Congress wasn't in session for any of August. I may have worked harder that month than at any time in my 5 years. I viewed the deal between Ayatollah Khamenei and Barack Obama as devastatingly bad. Not for Israel, although it's bad enough for them. Not for the Middle East, it's tragic for them. But for us, sitting here today in South Central Kansas, it was an acknowledgement that America was going to abandon the stage We can argue about the terms and conditions of the deal. I think we got nothing. But more importantly, what it told the world is that America was unprepared to be a part of leading the world to protect Western values all across it. And we see the results. I called 80 plus Democrat members, many of whom I didn't know, some of whom I did, to urge them to do what I knew they knew was right in their hearts, to reject this deal, to tell the Ayatollah that we would not be part of ensuring that he had received a nuclear weapon, and we damn sure weren't going to let him have $150 billion to spread terror around the world. And I got different answers, all of which were, Mike, I can't be with you on that. The political pressure is enormous. And it was. I had one, I won't mention his name, he's actually a decent fellow, tell me that he had never had so much opportunity to meet with Joe Biden and Barack Obama in person. And it wouldn't trouble me at all that they were making the case. In fact, that's what I was doing that day, right? I was calling them. I was trying to convince them of something. I brook no ill towards anyone who was trying to convince them otherwise. But the fight for them wasn't on the merits. It wasn't about whether it was a good deal. I didn't hear a single Democrat defend any component contained in the actual agreements. And I heard no Democrat challenge what you saw me say there, which is to this day, no American has read the entire agreement. They didn't challenge the facts. This was about politics. And that politics has led us to put ourselves in a place that we find ourselves today. And I'll turn to that. Yesterday at just afternoon, I voted on a piece of legislation that will put a significant pause and fundamentally restructure decisions about how the United States government determines whether someone traveling from Syria to the United States should be eligible to come here as a refugee. It was a really well done piece of legislation. It seemed like it came from nowhere, but in fact, a version of that bill had been being worked on for an awfully long time. A lot of the groundwork with respect to national security is being done in your United States House of Representatives today. And I'm deeply proud of having been a part of that. We had a chance at an urgent moment yesterday to actually work it on a little bit and get it to the floor. I hope the Senate will do the same in the week that is in front of us after Thanksgiving. We should know everyone who's coming into the United States. And I want to speak to that today because I think that's enormously important. Our legislation yesterday was a bit of a rifle shot. It attempted to put a halt to a program about folks coming here from a place that is in particularly desperate straits today, Syria. I can't even begin to explain it all to you today. We don't have the hours. But you should know that it is a direct result of failed U.S. leadership that those refugees are seeking assistance here today in the United States. So I'm not about to let Barack Obama for one minute talk to me about how I'm immoral for wanting to keep you all safe, or how somehow that's unchristian not to allow these folks to come here. Mr. President, you're the one who, when you had a chance to put Bashar Assad to bed and to put constraints on a Syrian regime that has now caused over 6 million people to flee their homes, Mr. President, you're the one who behaved in an immoral way. You're the one who had a political theory that said what stays in Damascus, what happens in Damascus stays in Damascus. And I wish it were so, but it is not. And so we in Congress are going to do all that we can to ensure that the folks who come to America, whether they come from Syria or Iraq or from Mexico or from any place else, that we understand who they are, why they are coming here, and we make good decisions to secure our borders and keep America in a place where we have an immigration policy that reflects our values. The president made a comment from foreign soil. He said something about how the Republicans were afraid of 5-year-olds. I'll get it wrong. I don't listen to him so much anymore. Mr. President, I'm not afraid of 5-year-olds. I'm afraid of a man in the White House. I'm afraid of a man in the White House who refuses to understand the deeply held American traditions. For many, many years, we had policies in place that restricted who came here. We've had immigration law forever. Unless someone in the world is trying to convince me that we should have completely open borders, it is just a matter of making decisions about who and how many and when. And yesterday, we made a decision about who and how many and when. And we'll keep doing that. This problem is much larger. I talked a little bit about the trip that I took. It was a trip that was incredibly timely, but that I had been working on as part of my role in the House Intelligence Committee for over 6 months. It's difficult to get the U.S. government to allow members of Congress into Beirut. It is a difficult place. And we put an enormous burden on our folks when I traveled there. The security issues are real. They took enormously good care of me, but I know it took a lot of resources for me to get there, but I needed to be there. We have programs, intelligence programs, that are going on there today that have provided valuable information, that have taken down plots that are very much of the nature of what we saw happen in Paris during the very trip that I was on. You should know that. You should know that our law enforcement people, the intelligence services who are liaison partners, including the Israeli intelligence services, have done enormously good work. And it may not last forever. It may be that we see this terror come to our soil, but you should know that there's a great deal of effort and really solid work being done to make sure and prevent that. An important element of that, as always, is to understand the problem. And I think this is where this administration's most enormous failing. I think the Affordable Care Act is tragic. I think Dodd-Frank is really bad. But this administration will go down in history as having, for the first time, put America in a place, from a national security perspective, that it has not found itself in anyone's lifetime in this room. It's a failure to understand the threat from radical Islamic terrorism. It is real. These young men are barbarians. They intend to create a caliphate, not just around Raqqa, not just around Idlib and Homs and Baghdad, but around the world. And they are prepared to conduct violence to achieve that end. And America has instead said, you know, we're going to let the Iranians handle this. And this is where I'll close. It is a complicated fight. You'll see Al-Qaeda fighting against ISIS. You'll see the Iranians saying that they want to take on ISIS. You'll see the Russians saying, we'll take on anyone so long as you'll give us enough terrain in Europe. This fight is against an ideology that threatens Western values. And we should not be fearful to talk about that. Those on the left will tell us that we are haters. It's simply not true. I met with faith leaders from nearly every faith that has leadership in Lebanon. And you, if anybody knows a little about Lebanon, that's a pretty broad swath. We met with the senior bishop of the Orthodox Church in Lebanon. We met with Christian leaders from the Maronite Christian Church. We met with the Grand Mufti, a Sunni Arab leader, a Muslim leader. Met with Shias who were fighting against Hezbollah in the south. Warriors, men who were on our side, trying to crush Hezbollah's threat not only against the West but against Israel as well. The line is drawn not between faith but between extremists and those who accept modernity and those who are barbarians. And we should understand that line, and we should never be fearful to walk right up to the line, find those on the other side, and crush them. It's the only way that I can see that I can do my most fundamental task as a member of Congress, and that's to keep everyone in this room and your family members and those of you who have brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles in our armed forces, to keep you all safe. I am dedicated to doing it. It is an enormous undertaking, and we should use all the tools available in America's arsenal to achieve that. Last thought, and then I'll take questions. I am very focused on ensuring that we get the right leader to lead the United States forward 354 days from now. I know a couple of things with absolute certainty. I know that Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton are not that right leader. Unanimity. Here, I'll try one more time. I have also chosen Senator Rubio as the candidate that I am going to put my shoulder to the grindstone on behalf of. I've gotten a chance to know him. I don't know all of the candidates, but I've watched his character. And I never knew Ronald Reagan. But as I see the man whose picture is here to my right, and I watch Senator Rubio's ability to make decisions, difficult decisions, to learn from mistakes that he has made, and I've made many too, and I've watched him engage with people who were blue-collar workers, folks who were Wall Street lawyers. I've been with him in congressional meetings where we were trying to get to the right place and get the best outcome in the face of Barack Obama. I think he's the man who can accomplish that. And I'm hopeful that this country once we get through our primary in March or April or May, we'll pick up our leader and put him in the right place. I think the nation demands it. I know the world will require it. And I hope that every one of you, no matter which candidate ultimately makes it through the system, will do everything you can to ensure that we do not get 4 more years of the policies of this administration. I don't think America can withstand it. We might survive it, but America will look radically different if we have a next president who engages in these same policies. It is unsafe, it is not good for America's economy, and the world will regret it as well. We've got a lot of work to do. Thank you for letting me be here. I'm happy to take a handful of questions from y'all.
Yes, the UN Charter calls a treaty an agreement between two nations by whatever name. Dictionary calls a treaty an agreement between international parties. Do you believe Congress and the President honor the oath of office and the Constitution by not putting the agreement to Iran and the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, to the Senate as a treaty?
So let me try and split those up. With respect to the Iran agreement, no. I was one of 24 members of the House and 1 United States Senator, my friend Senator Cotton, who voted against what was called Corker-Cardin. It was essentially a congressional abdication of exactly what you described, the Senate's obligation to ratify treaties. We were handing the president power in ways that we should not have. Now, to be honest, the truth is he would have done this with or without that. If we'd all voted against Corker-Cardin, the president was going to head down this path. There was literally, we weren't going to stop him. But it doesn't mean we had to acquiesce. And that's why I voted against that bill. I voted against it. I put out a statement that said, hey, this shouldn't be handled this way. We shouldn't need supermajorities to reject a deal between an Ayatollah and a president. And there you go. That's what happened. It wasn't presented as a treaty. The good news is it's not a treaty. The good news is you literally, how many folks know in this room how many signatures are actually on that document? 0. It's a press release. I mean, literally, what you had was you had a group that couldn't get to a final agreement. They said the clock has run out, and they took what they had and they put it together and they presented it as an agreement. And so the good news is it's not a treaty, and that has enormous ramifications for the next commander-in-chief and his capacity to move about the cabin, as Southwest Airlines describes it, to respond to the threat and to the core challenge in the Middle East today, which is Iran. At the root of most of the things you see today is Iran, and I could spend an awful lot of time talking about it. So the good news is it's not a treaty, and we'll have every effort to unwind it as best we can. With respect to TPP, hasn't been presented yet. We voted on Trade Promotion Authority. I voted for it. I've now had a chance to plug through about 1,000 of the 5,000 pages of the Trade Promotion TPP itself, the actual document. Guys, I know a lot of folks in this room don't like it. There's a lot of good things for Kansas in there. There's a lot of good things for America in there. And we'll have to figure out if on balance it makes sense for our country. I don't know. I haven't come to a firm conclusion yet. But 80% of the revenue that comes into the state of Kansas today comes from someone who was buying something that was outside of the United States and opening up markets for our plane makers and our oil and gas guys and our farmers is enormously important, and the TPP certainly does that. So we'll see. Anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Next question over here.
Yes. Ed, hello.
Congressman Pompeo, you have always advertised yourself as a deficit hawk. In many speeches, you have stated how the federal deficit is impacting our children and our grandchildren's future. Yet, Congressman, you voted for one of the largest budget busters since Obama has taken office. The so-called doc fix to pay doctors more to treat Medicare patients, according to the Office of Management and Budget, was going to raise the federal budget deficit $147 billion. The Heritage Foundation, which I'm a member of, stated it would raise the deficit $200 billion. Congressman, by voting for this budget-busting bill, were you pandering to older people who belong to the AARP at the expense of their children and grandchildren? One last note, presidential candidates, Senator Marco Rubio and Senator Ted Cruz, as well as Representative Tim Huelskamp, voted against the bill, saying that it was a budget buster and it would raise our children's, and it would harm our children's future.
I actually wasn't pandering to the AARP, just my dad. I'll take it on very seriously. The data you presented is just flat out wrong. It's just wrong. So let's talk about, most of you probably don't know what the doc fix is. For 45 years members of Congress have done is they have lied to you. Well, what we do is we say, you know, we're going to reduce payments under Medicare by about 25% every year. Every year. For 40, no, that's not true. For 13 years, so 8 years before my time, every year we would crawl up to the line and every doctor in America would say, I won't take another Medicare patient. I won't see one. Right? They're at the margin, they're making money. They're making marginal dollars on Medicare patients today. If you reduce their reimbursements by 25%, some of them will still see them because they're good people, but most of them ultimately will conclude they can't run their business. And so what happened every year, usually about December 31st at midnight, we fixed it. That is, we went and re-added that 25%. So a doctor would run through the whole year only getting paid 75% of the amount they thought they should be paid, or that the country had agreed, and then at the very end of the year, we would plus them up by 25%. That's insane. That's insane. And yet I have to tell you, the chance of that not happening was 0. So what do? You can vote against those one-year adjustments, as I did. You can vote against them. They're going to pass. And by the way, voting against them was a little tricky because I too believed that doctors wouldn't see patients. I was trying to get some control over the system. What we did was, you referred to it as the doc fix, we put in place a 10-year solution. We were honest. We said, no, we're actually going to pay those rates to doctors. We're not going to lie every year and say it's not going to bust the budget, when in fact at the last minute we do. We're going to be honest about how we're going to account for this. At least as honest as government accounting ever gets. But the second thing we did is we said we're going to pay for it. We're going to change another mandatory program by reducing the amount of money that is paid. That had never been done in the course of these annual one-year little accounting gimmicks that had been played. And we did. And I saw how Heritage thought the math would work. I saw how CBO thought the math would work. They may be right. It could be that it cost $100 billion, or in Heritage's number, $200 billion. Those are 10-year figures. And I'm here to report to you that if that legislation only cost $200 billion over 10 years, I'll bet we saved you over $1.5 trillion by putting in place the doc fix. Not because of what was there before, but because of what Congress would have done every year, year on year. Republican Congresses, Democrat Congresses, Republican presidents. I'm proud that I voted for the doc fix. We now have we now have a program in place where doctors can evaluate how they're going to treat patients, and we can begin to put the cost reduction measures in place and not lie to you every year about something we're not going to do. Let me add one more point. I hear some of you say, gosh, it doesn't matter. Republicans, Democrats, they're all the same. Anybody ever said that? Okay, because I have to, just so you know. So full disclosure, it matters an enormous amount. And it's a difficult argument to make, and so I won't spend a lot of time making it today, but you should know that most of the bad economic work that was done under this president was done in the first 24 months. We're living with it today. We have not unwound a great deal of it. I will concede that. But the deficit was $1.5 trillion when I came to Congress. Last year it was under $500 billion. Is anybody proud of that? I'm not. But it's a damn sight better than $1.5 trillion. It would have been $2.5 trillion deficit had you not gotten rid of Nancy Pelosi in 2011. I can assure you of that. They still have a list of things that they want to do. We see them all the time. I get emails from you. Hey, they passed this. They've got this new bill. They want to spend another $1 trillion. Stop them. Well, the good news is, my response is 3 words. Not going to happen. But it's not going to happen not because there's still not enormous demand in America for those programs. It's not going to happen because you all put the brakes on it. In 2011, you said enough. not having any more of this. And you sent me and 90 others to Washington to begin to roll it back. And we've done better than Nancy would have. And I'm incredibly proud of that piece of it. We now have to go elect more conservative members to the House. All right? The House of Representatives, I've talked to you about this before, is not as conservative as I am. So we've got to elect more conservative members to the House. We certainly need to do the same in the Senate, and then we need a leader who will take America and win again. Hope we will.
Congressman, what would be your evaluation of the merits and demerits of setting aside an area in the Middle East rather than bringing the folks over here to other countries?
Yeah.
Would you discuss that for us?
I sure will. We should have done it 3 years ago, and did not do that. 11 days ago, I was in the Bekaa Valley, the largely Islamist-controlled valley on the eastern edge of Lebanon, and we went to the Syrian border. And I went to tent cities, not quite internment camps, or not quite refugee camps. They're small. No permanent structures permitted. No sewage lines permitted. No concrete permitted. The Lebanese don't want them there. They want them to return. And if they build something permanent, they're afraid these refugees will stay. And we had a chance to meet with half a dozen families, all Syrian, no Christians, in any of the places that we went. And they didn't want to come to Kansas. They wanted to stay where they were. They wanted to go back to their country. And so we ought to do our best to solve the twin problems. The first one is to keep them as close to their homes as we can. There are significant camps of over several 100,000 in Jordan. There are over 1.4 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon today. Europe is now being inundated. We ought to keep them as close to home as we possibly can, and then we have to go solve the problem. And the problem is radical Islamic terrorism running free throughout Syria and western Iraq, and a leader, Bashar Assad, in Syria today, who has caused the displacement of over 6 million of his own people. We should keep them there. It wouldn't be nearly as expensive, frankly, as trying to figure out how to get them here to the United States, and it would be a better, more moral solution for them as well.
Could you explain to me, I thought the Congress controlled the purse strings, but how does, like, the Secretary of State, Hillary, when she went to Egypt, she gave them I think it was $2 billion, and the president on this thing with Iran gives releases $150 billion. How does he have, and how does she have the power to do that? I thought the budget was controlled by, money was controlled
It's
by
true.
the House.
You are a fine reader of the United States Constitution. You got it precisely right. Two different issues. The money that Iran is getting is their money. So it's different. It's not your money. It's not taxpayer money. It's not money that's been appropriated. It's money that was traveling through the global financial networks, and some really smart person at the Department of Treasury figured out where it was and froze it and denied them access to those funds. One of the most amazing things you find as soon as you get on the Intelligence Committee is that we have great warriors, great special forces, killer good young CIA people, and some of the folks doing the best work at the Department of Treasury. Their terror finance organization is unbelievably important, tracking money around the world, tracking money to places like Kansas, where terrorists from Kansas are shipping money to bad actors around the world. Our Department of Treasury is doing good work. That money is theirs. It's been frozen. The president, unfortunately, is going to unfreeze it as part of this deal, and so they will be getting their money back. We actually, remarkable, you'll remember the Iranians have been bad actors for an awfully long time. They've killed scores of Americans. They've killed Kansans, blown them up with IEDs in western Iraq when we had soldiers fighting there. Many of those folks have gone to U.S. courts and gotten judgments against that money. And we passed a bill in the House just simply saying this: if you're going to give them $150 billion, can we at least pay these young men and women the money that they are owed for the damage that Iran did to them and to their families? And the president said he would veto that bill. It's stunning. With respect to the second issue, foreign aid and other spending, I don't want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about Egypt in particular. I am actually one who believes that we should provide incremental resources to Egypt today. Along with Israel, they are a linchpin in fighting against radical Islamic terrorism. They're killing Al-Qaeda in the Sinai. They're killing Al-Shabaab in Somalia. They are working diligently alongside us and, importantly, alongside the Israelis in a way the Egyptians have never done before. And we ought to support them to the extent they are trying to create a society that is not an extremist society. And I've met President Sisi. I have to be a little careful. I'll say it this way. You don't find many Thomas Jeffersons over there. Okay. So once you accept that, as I said before, the line needs to be drawn who are those who are on the side of extremism and those who are fighting against it, of whatever faith we may find to them. And Sisi today, at personal risk to his own life, is fighting against the extremists and the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And so for that reason, it's something that I think makes good sense. We need to monitor it. We need to make sure he doesn't turn. I'll give you another good example. I met with a man in Lebanon. I actually wanted to meet with this guy. And I will not tell you who he is because it will get him killed if I told you. There was a man who blew up the Khobar Towers. Does everybody remember this? Killed Americans in the Khobar Towers. One of the first reaches of Al-Qaeda and of Islamic extremism in modern times. America had been looking for him for almost 20 years. And some really good work. And you should be proud. Some of you will be proud. A young man who was a graduate of Kansas State University. Some of you will go, okay. Was involved in tracking this man for the last 2 years. And they learned that he was going to travel to a particular place. And another man, a Muslim leader, was told about that by us. And at his own personal risk, captured him and transferred him to Saudi Arabia, where he will rot or die in prison. 20 years to bring this man to justice who killed Americans. And so I say all of that because if you track what that went to, he was hiding in Iran, by the way, you should know, all these years, conducting terror plots in Saudi Arabia and throughout the Middle East for 20 years. And it took us a while to track him down and find him. But you should know that the first tip came from a Muslim, the second one was passed on by a Jew, the third one came from a Christian, and it was ultimately a Muslim who took him to a Muslim country where he will die. The line is very clear. Are you with us or against us? And if you're with us, God bless you, Godspeed, let's go get him. And if you're against us, Godspeed, I have a missile that is looking for you. On that uplifting note, Dan.
We have a new Speaker of the House. What are your impressions? What has changed? What do you expect to change? And what do you see good?
That's a really good question. So I know Paul, he's got deep Kansas roots. I like him. He is a movement conservative in a way that our previous speaker wasn't. That is, Paul sort of grew up, right, reading conservative literature and understanding the movement and can talk the same way we all talk about freedom and liberty and limited government. He lives it. It's in his bones. It's in his blood. It's who he is. So that I'm excited about. I think we saw that when he ran for vice president. I think you saw who Paul was. My hesitation isn't about Speaker Ryan. It's about the Republican caucus. Same Republican caucus. The same timidity from a large number of folks. You put a bill, we'll do appropriations bills, and Marsha Blackburn, God bless her, will always have the one final amendment, and it says we're going to reduce this appropriations bill by 1% across the board. And it fails. It fails not because the Democrats all vote against it, which they do, but because 100 Republicans vote against that amendment as well. That's the caucus today that Speaker Ryan is attempting to lead. And that's the challenge. It's when we try and do bold, big things, Paul is going to have to use his own personal force, which is powerful. We saw that, I think, on Thursday. There were 40 Republicans set to vote against that bill yesterday, the refugee bill. Paul used his own personal force and goodwill to drag them across the line to get to what I thought was the right place. I hope that he can continue to do that. The next big task will be December 11th, an omnibus spending bill. brace yourselves. It's going to have a lot of really bad things in it. But hopefully we can get enough good things in it that we can all stare at it and say, that's progress. I hope we can stop pieces of the Clean Power Plan. I hope this refugee language is in there. I hope defunding of Planned Parenthood is in there. There are half a dozen things that I hope Paul can get in there and can make stick as against Harry Reid and Barack Obama. I'm hopeful. It was the right time to turn the page in the House. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman, for being here today. One of the main concerns I have is the vetting process that you hear is so robust and able to vet out any bad actors. I simply don't believe in that. I don't believe it exists from my experience in law enforcement. Can you comment a little bit more about what you think the vetting process would be?
So, two things. First, you don't have to take my word for it. You can ask the Department Leader of Homeland Security and the Director of the FBI, each of whom worked for Barack Obama and have said, I'll try and summarize, no can do. That it's an incredibly difficult problem. In law enforcement, when you bring somebody in, I haven't actually watched your booking procedures, at least I'm not going to admit that I've been there. It's been a long time. The first thing you do is you go check someone's record, right? And you check it against a database. And so the check that you do is only as good as the database that you have. If the Social Security number is typed in wrong or their name is misspelled or what have you, it'll come back saying nothing, there's no priors, no previous derogatory information, what have you. That's the place we find ourselves today with refugees that are traversing out of Syria and Iraq. When Susan and I were there, I asked the folks from the UN, and I have a lot of problems with the UN, but I will tell you these are really decent people in a tough place trying to feed and clothe some people for whom we all have enormous compassion. But you ask them, what's this fellow's name? And they tell you his name. And you say, how do you know that? And they say, that's what he told me. Or that's what she told me, right? I mean, they come across, they've been fleeced, right? These people are fleeing terror too. And so they had to get across the checkpoint. They took their last $1,000 and they handed it to the guy at the checkpoint, and they were lucky to get across with the clothes on their back. So there's no capacity to truly develop a robust vetting system. It's not about energy and effort. It's about what do we know and don't know. And over some period of time, you might be able to develop that, right? You might see their behavior in the camp. You might watch them. You might see who they're talking to. So you might be able to develop a pattern that you could get comfortable, that you'd say, yeah, this person isn't coming here to commit acts of horror. But with the absence of good knowledge about who they are, it's not a risk that America ought to take today. And the vetting process for these folks is not adequate to rise to that challenge. Yes?
Thank you, Congressman. As we all know, you served in the Marines. And
Army guy. I was an Army guy. Yeah. Yeah. Look at this. Look, the Marines out here are all going, we wouldn't take him.
We are so very grateful. What advice would you give for those that are enlisting, as we have a son shipping out on Sunday for basic in the Air Force?
Oh my gosh, first thing I'd say is God bless them. And I mean that, and for you and for the families that are supporting their efforts to go be part of our armed forces. I run into these folks. I get to see them all the time. Not here, here in Kansas for sure, but when I'm doing my intelligence work, most of the folks who work in our intelligence world today came out of the military at some point in time. Susan and I were with this fellow. So what would I say? I'd say go enjoy a long, productive service and sacrificing on behalf of your nation. You have my commitment and the commitment of so many people, frankly, from both parties, to provide the resources that they all need to do their jobs well, and that we are equally committed to finding them a commander-in-chief that will honor the service that they have committed to. We met this fellow, great story, I'll bet not much different than your son, who enlisted and joined the military, became part of Delta Force, was one of the first people to ride a four-legged animal into Tora Bora. Now works for our intelligence agency. And Susan was with his wife and said, why do you do this? The family travels. He's almost never home. He's been on the ground in the Middle East trying to sort out what's going on in Syria now for a handful of years. And she said, you know, he had an offer from a company to pay him 25 times what he makes today working for the United States government. He's probably in his late 30s by now, maybe early 40s. And Susan asked the obvious question, and so? And she said, you know, we're in this. And America needs my husband, and we're going to do this. And it sounds like your son has that same heart, and I've seen so many who do, and we need them. They're going to be called upon, I assure you. And I hope we can continue to recruit talented young men and women to take on those incredibly difficult tasks.
Next question's over here.
You are in the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives controls the purse. Are we gonna or are we not going to defund Planned Parenthood before the end of this year?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for Mark. You know, I would guess that we won't. I voted against a piece of legislation because it didn't contain defunding for Planned Parenthood. I ultimately voted for a piece of legislation when it was reinserted. I do think it's incredibly important. And it is the case, the second person who's brought this issue up, it is the case that the House controls the purse strings. It absolutely is. But when you go back and read the Federalist Papers, Federalist 10, and most relevant to this, our option set is much more limited than I wish it was, right? We can take it out, and the president can veto the bill, and we end up in a place where the government can't move forward. No problem. You say no problem, Mark. That's a little too clever by half, because that woman's son can't sustain that for very long. It's a little too clever to say no. I'm finished. I'll let you ask another question if you'd like. But it's a little too clever to say no worries on shutting down the government. I have voted to shut down the government an awful lot of times. Full disclosure. And I have voted several times against us when we were reopening it. Whatever that means. We use these words as euphemisms. The government doesn't completely shut down. Much continues to happen. I get it. I understand it completely and thoroughly. But there does have a point where we start getting phone calls. Not usually from the military member because they're too proud, but usually from their spouse who says, I'm about to get kicked out of my trailer at the trailer home park we live next to Fort Benning, Georgia, because I'm not going to get a paycheck. It doesn't happen on day 1. It doesn't happen on day 30. It happens about day 60. And so I just say, with respect to every issue, you could say we should not pass a bill unless it defunds any money for Syrian refugees to come to America. You could say we should shut it down if they keep these silly Endangered Species Act rules in place. You could say we should shut it down for waters of the U.S., for Planned Parenthood. The list is enormous. The list is enormous. And I just ask everyone's forbearance as we try to figure out the right tactical solutions to getting as much as we need. And I will likely, if Planned Parenthood funding remains in this bill, vote against it, much as you described, Mark. But know this, there's 100 Republicans that will vote for it, maybe 150. And so the bill will pass. And to the extent I declare that I'm not going to vote for it, my capacity to fix other things becomes near zero. You should know there are roughly 30 members of the House who have voted against every one of these. Every one of them. So it is known going in that out of 247 Republicans, you're right about 218 at the entry point. Those folks who have chosen that path, they're honorable people, but their capacity to influence anything that's in that bill is zero, because you've lost their vote. It's gone. It's a preordained solution that you can't get. And so I work hard. I always forget that I'm not at home. It's like I can't use my TV language here. That's pretty good, Susan, wasn't it? Thank you. Mid-sentence, I caught myself. So I have tried to work to find a place that presses on what is an enormously outrageous issue, the funding of the processes and procedures that we saw at this Planned Parenthood facility. It is not limited to Planned Parenthood either, as you well know, Mark. It's happening in other facilities that are not Planned Parenthood facilities. We need to stop it. It is, in fact, criminal, and it is morally repugnant. There's not much more that one can say about those practices. Finding a solution to getting rid of them it's not enough to scream and holler about them. We have to go try and take positive action, and we have the Congress that America sent in 2014. I'm working very hard to put a Congress in place and a president where we won't have to debate this. It literally won't be a discussion. It'll be a priori given fact that Planned Parenthood will never receive another dollar.
Over here with Bob.
Yes, Bob.
Cato Institute, as bad as things are, Dan Mitchell of the Cato Institute has shown that for the past 4 years about federal spending as a percent of national income has actually come down. And he attributes that to, there has been slow and tepid growth in the economy, but also the Budget Control Act, the sequester, has actually done some good in rolling or restraining the growth of federal spending. But I think that the budget bill that just passed reverse some of those budget cuts. Is that true, and could you comment on that?
It is true. I have a handful of votes I'm proud of, a couple that I'm not going to tell you about that I'm not very proud of. You all might know them. But the Budget Control Act in August of 2011 may be the best vote I've ever taken. And by the way, just so we all know, those same 30 folks voted against that, plus or minus a handful of them. The Budget Control Act has been the thing. I talked about the deficit going from $1.5 trillion to $500 billion. There are multiple reasons, but one of those reasons is the Budget Control Act. We literally took discretionary spending and reduced it year on year. Hadn't happened in 70 years. And it's good. It's unbridled good. We did undo that. Congress did undo that. I voted against undoing it a couple months back. Not by a lot, but in my judgment by too much. It wasn't even the amount that it broke the caps by. You could justify it. We needed some more money. There were a bunch of folks who wanted to provide more money for our armed forces on our side, and the price to pay was to spend a little bit more money for something the president wanted. And that was the deal. An incremental $30 billion for defense and an incremental $30 billion for domestic priorities that belong to the president. You know, that, at the end of the day, not the end of the world, but the breaking of the caps sets a precedent that I can't stand for. And so I voted against it. I think we should have kept them in place. We could have found a way to fund those defense needs, and I think our leadership walked away from that. Those caps are important. You all know this. If you send more money to Washington, we'll figure out a way to spend it. And so the fact that we were able to get Barack Obama to sign an agreement to limit spending, to truly put a cap. EPA is 27% smaller today than it was when I came to Congress. That's not bad. Yeah, I know. It should be 87% smaller. I get it. It's not bad. But we broke those caps, and it's unfortunate. I'm afraid it's a harbinger of things to come. And I hope that I'm wrong about that.
Okay, do we have another member?
Carol, yes, ma'am.
I'm having a little bit of trouble figuring out how to ask this because I usually talk about facts, but I want to talk more about how we feel about having a commander-in-chief that really doesn't seem to be on our side. And we've had all these hearings, and I know you all work so hard, but we haven't really seen anything of justice come out of those. And we have FBI agents who we pretty sure know at least that Hillary Clinton misled Congress. And yet nobody believes that anything's going to be done with her. And we have Joint Chiefs of Staff who are in a horrific situation with the Commander-in-Chief. We have two houses of Congress, and it just feels out here like that really there's not that much can be done except wait 14 months. But I mean, can you address those feelings?
I can because I appreciate that. You are always fact-based, but emotion matters, and you're right to feel that way. I feel that way. I feel that way every day. You didn't but have to watch me at the Benghazi hearings to know that the folks on our side most all feel that way. I was reminded. So I had 3 opportunities for 10 minutes each. My first one, I asked her about accountability, why no one received so much as a I gave myself an A for that line of questioning. My son gave me a C. My second set of questions, I frankly didn't do as well. It was more difficult to control her extended answers. It was trickier, and I let my emotion get a hold of me a little bit more. You can go back and watch it. It only takes 10 minutes. I wasn't as good. I gave myself a C. My wife gave me an F. So it's a tough curve at the Pompeo house. I mentioned that, Carol, because emotion does matter. I actually looked back at my second 10 minutes, and I actually like it now. Look back on it, because you can see the enormous frustration on my face with the place that America finds itself today. And I don't want to wait 14 more months. I don't want to wait 14 more hours. And so we'll do everything we can. But the Constitution did set out this framework, and we're constitutional believers, and so we are both emboldened by the Constitution and constrained by what we can do. And so we're going to go tell the story. Actually, I don't know if everybody's noticed one big difference. You asked Dan about the new speaker. Has anybody seen how much he's been out talking on TV, putting the Republican message forward in ways that the House leadership has not during my first 5 years? That will matter. That will absolutely. And he is articulate, and he is fearless, and it will matter. And so we'll do our best. I do want to address one thing that you said that's of substance and important. The FBI is engaged in an important task in determining what classified material was contained on the server of not only the former Secretary of State, but many of the folks who worked alongside of her. I've had a number of conversations with senior leaders inside the FBI attempting to ensure that we get a straight answer. Whether they prosecute or not is the Justice Department's decision. But America will get to make an answer based on the facts that are found by America's most senior law enforcement agency. And those are the folks doing the work today. And I will tell you, I have increasing confidence in the men and women that have been put on the task of doing that work, to put their answers in place. And my ask has been very simple. My ask has been, when you're done, share with us what you find. If you find that no laws have been broken, I want to know that, because I don't want to talk about this again. Right? I'm not tired of it like Bernie Sanders is, but I don't want to talk about it again. If there's no laws broken, fine. They behaved appropriately, so good. Let's move on down the road. We'll go talk about substantive matters that matter to America. But we need to know what the FBI concluded. So we've asked them to make public their final report. Those of you in the room are law enforcement people say, well, when we do an investigation, we find there's no wrongdoing. We don't drag the people through because we don't want people to know we're investigating. That wouldn't be right? Somebody comes, knocks on your door, finds out you're not a terrorist. You don't want them going, hey, we called Mike, and it turns out he wasn't a terrorist, right? Law enforcement doesn't do that. This is different. This is fundamentally different. There's no secrets about the investigation that's taking place. And so it seems to me the FBI owes America an answer to what it is that they find. And so we're going to press them to do that, regardless of what decision is ultimately made about whether someone decides there's a criminal prosecution that should follow. I actually have drawn my conclusion. It's pretty straightforward. We had very complex, very important classified information contained on a server that sat at a private facility long after the former Secretary of State left government service. End of story. Questions?
Over here, there are several
hands
that are still up, but I think we're going to wind it down with one more.
All right. I'm sorry I've got on.
Yeah. Historically, 25 years ago, the FBI director would have said, we've got investigations going on in all 50 states, and there's 1,000 terrorists all over the country. And we have a president who says, well, JV team, and it's all contained. The Islamist supremacists who are behind this, whether they're Sunni or Shia, is really irrelevant in terms of the domestic threat within. The question I would like to throw out, 25 years ago, this would have been unheard of, and how we've got from there to here. And is it fair to say that at least within the United States, the JV team may be winning?
Yes, the internal security risk today is at unprecedented levels. I think that is absolutely fair to say. What else to say? I will tell you broadly, America in some measures under both Republicans and Democrats hasn't taken this seriously enough. I think we all had hoped that it would stay someplace else and wouldn't come to our shores. But the director of the FBI talked about 50 states. You should know about once every 3 months, I meet with the law enforcement, national security folks who are working here in Kansas and get the list of the terror investigations that are taking place in Kansas. And I'll share with you what I can in an unclassified setting. It's not a 2-minute briefing. It takes a while to go through the list of the work that they're engaged in. And it's around us. Every bit of that investigation involved folks who are extremists for sure, and every one of them has some connection to Islamic extremism around the world. In some cases, it's just, it's not violent, but my judgment is that we need to go well past what is violent extremism. If you are communicating with, talking to, facilitating, providing resources and money for, educating, training, helping, assisting, and you are part of that network, you are someone who America has every right and indeed an obligation to pull from the streets. We have deep constitutional commitments to what we allow people to do. You all want to be able to talk about your faith. I talk about mine all the time. I want everyone to be able to do that. But when you begin to engage with networks around the world that are part of jihadist organizations, you are no longer talking about your faith, but you're putting people in my neighborhood at risk. And so there's an awful lot of work to do. We had a big dust-up. I was at the center of the dust-up. Some of you didn't like what I was saying about what the National Security Agency was doing with respect to how it was attempting to balance those privacy rights, but making sure also that we had access to data sets. I'll give you a good example. What do you think one of the first things that our NSA did in the aftermath of the explosions in Paris? It found selectors. It found phone numbers. It found information that was associated with who they believed had conducted that attack. And the first thing they wanted to know was they wanted to be able to call Sheriff Easter and say, Sheriff Easter, I need you to run out to 1310 Perth Court, that's my address. And I need you to go talk to the fellow who lives at that address, because it turns out he was having a conversation with somebody who we now think was connected to a bombing. That's important work. That is a valuable asset, to be able to instantaneously identify connections inside the United States. And so I would ask you, as we go evaluate how to respond fully, it certainly requires a response in the Middle East. We're going to have to go lead. We're going to have to go get out in front. It may well take some of your family members on the ground in one of those places. If somebody told me, Mike, that's required, I'm not convinced yet, but if that's required, if that's what it completely takes to destroy ISIS and keep folks safe in Omaha and Wichita, sign me up. I know they won't take me anymore. I'm 70 pounds overweight and 25 years too old. But I think it's the right thing for America to go do. And if it's the case that we need to make sure that we have the data sets so that we can immediately identify when someone kills someone in Tel Aviv, not very far from where Susan and I were just a week ago. There was an American killed in Tel Aviv yesterday. To make sure that there aren't connections back into California, or New York, or Florida, or Ohio, or Dearborn, Michigan. We ought to do those things. We'll protect privacy. Make no mistake about it. We are not going to give up those Fourth Amendment freedoms that we're engaged in fighting for. But we need to make sure that the resources and tools are available. The threat, in fact, has now spread from the Middle East to Europe and the West. The mission isn't in the Middle East. The mission is to destroy the great Satan. And so we have an obligation to do our tasks well. I'll close with this thought. Much of what we talk about today is challenging and difficult, and I would concede America finds itself in a place today where there is much work to do. I wouldn't get out of my bed every morning and hop on an airplane and fly back to this ridiculous city called Washington every week to do my work if I wasn't convinced that America will prevail. I just wouldn't do it. If I thought it was over, if I thought we were done, if I thought there was no ability to get ourselves back to the right place, I'd go put it in a safe room, get a few more firearms, and call it good. But that's not where America is today. It is the case that we're going to find the right leader. We're going to find people of goodwill from a broad political perspective who understand these challenges that we're talking about. And if you will permit your elected officials to talk about them the way that we had the opportunity to have our conversation today, I am convinced that this clash between these barbarians who are afraid of modernity And those of us who aspire to create a world where Western values are appreciated and tolerance is accepted will prevail. I believe it in my heart, and every day I'm working to help you all achieve the things you want to do in that great place. Thanks for the chance to be here today. May God bless each and every one of you. And have a great Thanksgiving.